Brothers and guests, thank you for joining us tonight for our first State of Delta Upsilon Town Hall. My name is Justin Kirk, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of Delta Upsilon Fraternity and Educational Foundation. I just want to go over a few logistics for tonight before we get started with the presentation. I want to thank all those who have shared their questions in advance. We've received a number of those, and we will attempt to answer those throughout tonight's presentation. If you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box. We hope to get to all of your questions this evening. If you have a more specific question about your chapter, please type it in your box with your email, and we will follow up after the session. And we will answer most of the questions at the end of the presentation. We couldn't be more pleased that we have nearly 200 brothers joining us for tonight's presentation. Thank you again for joining us, and welcome. I am joined tonight by our fraternity president, Tom Durein, Oregon State 92.
Good afternoon, depending on where you are. Good afternoon and good evening, brothers. Although we are virtual, it is great to be with you, and thank you for taking time out of your day or your evening to be with us on the first of what we hope will be a continuing opportunity to meet with you in this way. I'm going to start with a few notes that perhaps many of you heard when we shared a message out via the internet or via the social media back when we were just getting started in COVID. But it's important for me to remember that sharing our story it's one of the things that's most gratifying. It's one of the most satisfying parts about being president of the fraternity. So thank you very much again for joining us. In what felt like a blink of an eye this past spring, our world stopped on a dime, as it did for many of you. In March 2020, COVID-19 became a global pandemic, and it halted much of our day-to-day existence. Around the globe, universities and businesses closed, and we were asked to limit our travel and to figure out how to learn and work from home and to educate our families from home. We learned the term social distancing, and we encouraged our students at our universities and colleges throughout North America to do the same. And we couldn't be more proud of how our undergraduates, their alumni, and our chapters responded during this crazy time of adversity. COVID-19 has certainly brought about significant challenges, but it's also brought about some opportunities. It would be easy for all of us to complain about what's going on the campuses and in our communities, and about the restrictions that have been handed down or not handed down, and the focus on what we cannot do throughout North America. Fortunately, the fraternity has chosen to adopt a more positive mindset and to consider what it is that we can be doing, and or maybe how we could be doing things differently at the fraternity so that we can support our undergraduates in a different way. It has certainly been a challenging 7 months, almost 7 months, but if we've learned anything, it's that brotherhood and the DU experience is essential, probably more important now than ever before. I mentioned that I've been fortunate to be in contact with my own chapter brothers, and it's opened up a whole new dialogue that perhaps I'd taken for granted and hadn't been able to enjoy, and maybe you've experienced something similar. But we've been reminded of how much our brothers actually mean to us, and we've discovered new ways to stay connected. Maybe you have it too, and support one another. A quick reminder that this is not the first time that this has ever happened in the world, or even to us at Delta Upsilon, obviously, since 1834. This isn't the first time that we've been impacted by such a large-scale global event. We've endured wars, obviously, and other outbreaks. In 1918, obviously, for example, we dealt with both at the exact same time, but by working together and by focusing on one another and our needs, our collective needs, DU came out of World War I, for example, and the influenza pandemic, a stronger organization. And that's exactly what we are confident and believe will happen now. So I'd just like to kick it off again, thanking you for joining us, and thanks to the collaboration and the partnership between the fraternity and the fraternity's educational foundation. We feel like we've stayed one step ahead of the challenges in building better men during these unique times. So thank you again, and I'll turn it back over to Justin for a minute.
Well, thanks, Tom. And I've had this great pleasure of serving as DU's Executive Director for the past 14 years. And to say this academic year was unlike any other is certainly was an understatement. As I think back to early to mid-March, we were having a successful academic year. We just finished our regional leadership academies. We were thinking about our summer plans for the Emerging Leaders Program, our 2 Global Service Initiative trips, and beginning planning for our Leadership Institute, which was set to take place in late July in Orlando. And then all of our worlds changed in March once the pandemic hit and universities started to close campus. That I can vividly remember that we had 1 campus close and 2 campus closes, and we had really no idea at the time what was going to happen. But our staff immediately really shifted our efforts from visiting chapters in person to coaching chapters on how to operate virtual and assisting our house corporations with helping students leave campus and closing down the chapter facilities. And in less than a week, we went from all of our chapter houses being open and fully operational to nearly every one of them closed for the semester. But we knew immediately that we had to continue operating, that just because our chapter houses and campuses were closing in mid-March, it didn't mean that the DU experience was going to end in the middle of that spring semester. So we began delivering programming to support our chapters in a virtual environment. And we were really able to shift our operations pretty quickly. And we'll share a little bit more about that this evening. But like many organizations and businesses, the pandemic significantly impacted our headquarters operation. We had more than 500 associate members this spring who were recruited and looking forward to being initiated to joining DU, who they simply weren't. That campus was closed and those associate members really never had that chance to become a DU brother and enjoy our public ritual. We started to work to cancel all of our summer programs. Like I mentioned, we had an Emerging Leaders Program, 2 Global Service Initiatives, and LI. We had to begin scenario planning on how would we operate through the remainder of the spring and the summer with so many unknowns. But to secure the health of the fraternity, we acted quickly. We made some tough decisions. The fraternity had to furlough nearly 1/3 of our fraternity staff, and we haven't brought them back yet. Some of our staff volunteered to take pay cuts. But despite having fewer staff, we knew that this year we would have to provide chapters and alumni, house corporations, more services and support than ever before. That we'd be entering this environment that was unknown, and there'd be a lot of uncertainty, but we knew that we had to provide more support. So tonight we'll share some details in what we're doing and that how we're helping chapters, what this year looks like, what we're planning for the future. And we're really going to focus on a couple key areas: strategy, membership, chapter servicing, educational programs, finances, loss prevention, and alumni engagement. So we'll talk a little bit about how we ended last year, our plans throughout the summer into the fall, and how we think we're doing now. And so, Tom, I'll turn it over to you to talk about some fraternity strategies.
Perfect. Okay, so as we talk a little bit about strategy, I want to talk about the fraternity's board of directors and our strategic planning efforts. For many of you, you may be aware that we the fraternity's board is actually a strategic board, and that means that we set the vision and we do the long-term planning for the organization and for our undergraduates. And our headquarters team, led by Justin, is in charge of actually executing the operations to achieve that vision. So we have a very active and a very working board. It was interesting because Justin mentioned earlier, we talked a little bit about the fact that we're not unique at the fraternity. You all, many of you out there, and by the way, thank you again for joining us today, but we can't be the only organization that everybody's involved with. And we know that so many of you are probably involved in lots of different organizations that have been going through lots of the challenges that Justin talked about just a second ago. So you're experiencing probably many of these things yourselves. But our fraternity's board is very, very active, and as I mentioned, a working board. And 10 years ago, the fraternity's board actually had a president's task force that was led by the former fraternity president, Dr. Bernard Franklin, Kansas State DU, that framed, that particular task force was framing how our fraternity was going to be relevant in the 21st century. So that was their kind of charge. And the task force recommendations led to our last strategic plan that we're currently in the final stages of executing, still executing on some of that. The hallmarks of that particular plan were new and enhanced educational programs, better delivery systems for those programs and to our undergraduates and alumni, and measurement. And the plans led the fraternity to some unparalleled success, which I know Justin will mention, but if we were to pat ourselves a little bit on the back, and we can over the last 10 years, we've experienced some significant growth, some performance, academic performance that's been unparalleled before, and our chapters and our alumni continue to grow. So as I mentioned, those strategic plans led to many new programs and initiatives that shape kind of the experience of our undergraduates today. A few of them would include the Global Service Initiative, if you're familiar with that, the Membership Outcomes Assessment. We've revised our Regional Leadership Academy. We have an updated Associate Membership Education Program now, the Men of Merit Standards Program, Building Better Men Retreats, which we offer to our undergraduates to coordinate and schedule at their request, and the Advisors Academy to do the same. Many of those new initiatives have received industry recognition. And when we say industry recognition, we mean not only among our peers, meaning other fraternal organizations, but on college campuses throughout North America have recognized our programs as kind of their best in class or what they've seen. And we've been recognized with outstanding change initiatives from the Association of Fraternity and Sorority Advisors for our work to kind of transform and again, fulfill what our strategic mission was, which is how can we as an organization be relevant in the 21st century? So that brings us to where we are now, and coincidentally where we were right before we headed into COVID, which is that our board is currently engaging in a new visioning process. And it's led by one of our board members, Lynn Lukow, who is a North Dakota alum, to help the fraternity explore what better building men really means for today. Now, you know that's a motto for the fraternity, but what does it mean for today's college student? And how are we able to really articulate that at both the undergraduate and the alumni level? We want to talk about the ultimate reason that we exist. I mean, that's the question we're asking is to what end are we existing as a fraternity, as an undergraduate effort with Delta Upsilon? We want to resonate in the hearts and minds and actions of the undergraduates. How does building better men resonate for them? What does it look like? How does it action out on their campuses and in their communities, in their fraternity, their chapter environments? We're looking forward to continuing that vision. As it's interesting, we as a board can not be meeting in person right now, and that's a hard conversation to have when you can't be physically in person and reading people's facial expressions and things like that. It's very tough to do over Zoom, as you can imagine. So we're continuing to work through that, and it's taking us a little bit of time, but we're looking forward to having more information to share out with you, hopefully by the summertime. And then finally, and perhaps very interestingly and most important right now, in light of the significant unrest and racial unrest that we've experienced in our country this summer, we worked to establish the Advancement of Justice Task Force. Perhaps you all read when we got that going a few months ago, to explore how we live our fraternity motto, Dikaya Upitheka, Justice, Our Foundation. I encouraged this particular task force because in response to what was going on in our country at the time, as our students were spending time on their own or on their campuses over the summer, and then looking at coming back together as communities, it was very, very important to us to really start to tackle, gosh, that is one of our 4 founding principles, and yet what does that truly look like right now? What does justice look like for our fraternity? Well, we had more than 40 experts volunteer to engage in or were aware of that invitation. If you would like to get involved, please just let us know. We'd love to welcome more people into that conversation. But I'd like to share with you, very importantly in the town hall, what the task force charge has been determined to be. Justin, I think, is going to put it up. We've got it up. The task force is charged, the Justice Task Force is charged with examining the fraternity's educational programs, operations, policies, and procedures around anti-racism and diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're not alone on this, by the way. This is happening on college campuses and in businesses on our world all over the place. This is our effort in our own fraternity to do this. The task force will provide recommendations on resource development that will aid the fraternity in its mission to continually encourage its members to confront all injustices that they encounter in the chapter, on their campuses, in their own communities at home. As you can imagine, we've received a ton of feedback since we developed this task force, since we sent it on its way and we asked it to start having these conversations. They've been informative, they've been educational, they've been easy, and they've been hard. But it has become very, very clear to us that we have lots of people with wonderful opinions on how they can contribute, or just opinions on our efforts. And we want to be clear that this initiative, this task force, is not about political opinion or ideology. It's basically very, very simply about enhancing our efforts related to the advancement of justice in today's world. That's our strategy conversation right now. That's where we're hoping to go with the fraternity's board. That's what we're doing on an active daily basis. From a meeting perspective, just so you know, we are meeting more on the regular than we were before. We're able to meet via Zoom, so it's great. We can get everybody together that way, but we've had to come together a lot more as a board to be doing some of the things that Justin was talking about: planning, budgeting, shifting and changing, pivoting, so that we can best support our undergraduates and their experience when they came back to campus in the fall. To that point, I'll turn it back over to Justin.
Thanks, Tom. We'll talk a little bit about the fraternity's membership, and this is one of the areas that we received a lot of questions asking, how are we doing? That the pandemic has hit, some campuses are virtual, how many students actually came back to school? And so let me share a little bit of the data with you. We ended last year with just under 3,800 members in our 69 chapters and colonies, for an average chapter size of 55. And that average chapter size of 55 is right around the all-time high in the history of BU. I think our peak is around 56, 56 and a half. And so an average chapter size at the end of last spring is one of our better numbers that we've had. We ended last spring with a GPA of 3.26, up from a 3.08 the previous spring. And that GPA number is the highest that we've recorded in about the last 15 years. And so we had a really strong academic semester in the spring semester. But in the spring, we were impacted by the pandemic. We had originally planned to charter our Bucknell chapter in April, but unfortunately, Bucknell had to put their chartering plans on hold, and we were able just to do that this past semester, or this past month in September. We did charter our Missouri chapter last fall, and so to bring back two of our old golds, Missouri and Bucknell, two of our longtime strong chapters, really is a great addition back to the fraternity. And the board of directors has adopted a pretty aggressive growth strategy over the next couple of years. And so we have a number of campuses that we anticipate returning to, whether it be this spring, next year. We actually have an expansion calendar planned out for the next 4 years. And so many of those campuses that you see on the list there are old golds, but some of them will be new DU chapters for us in the future. And some have asked, well, how do we start a chapter, or how does an alumni group bring back a chapter? And so I'll just talk about a couple of these chapters specifically, because there's a couple ways that we approach expansion. And so when we close a chapter for really any number of reasons, anytime we close a chapter, we work with the university and the alumni to set a target date for its return. We never want to close a chapter and leave that date open that we can't plan for it. The alumni don't have something to look forward to, that we have a plan for the chapter facility. So for instance, in the case of Purdue, when we all agreed to close the chapter, we set this academic year as the time that we would return to Purdue. We have other chapters like Tennessee. We have a great group of alumni who were meeting on an annual basis, and they reached out and said, we'd like to restart our chapter. What would it take? And so we started working with our Tennessee alumni and the university, and we have Tennessee on the calendar to bring back. But then we have other campuses like at Tampa and Nevada that have reached out to DU and said, you know, we've heard some really good things about the programs that you guys are putting on, and We think you'd be a great addition to our campus community. So they're actually reaching out to us to say, we would love to have you on campus. And so we pursue those expansion opportunities. So if there's any alumni on the call that really would love to bring their chapter back, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll see what we can do to put the chapter back on our expansion calendar. And so as we thought about this fall and chapters returning to campus, of our 69 chapters and colonies, we have 16 of our chapters who are fully virtual this fall. And so that means they're taking their classes online. But what's interesting about that is 8 of those 16 have members still leaving in the chapter facility. So the members are still having a chapter experience, they're still engaged, they're connected with each other, they're doing brotherhood activities, but they're all taking their classes online. And over the summer, we had a running tracker of every campus. And every time that we could track down any information, we'd hear from undergraduates, we'd hear from alumni. We really wanted to be able to keep track of what was happening on every one of the campuses in which we had a DU chapter. And as we come back to school, we have 16 of our chapters that are virtual. And so over the summer, we spent a lot of our time thinking about this fall. And if I think back to sitting in the office, actually sitting at home because the office was closed, but thinking about what the fall would bring, there was optimism, and then we'd have some report of a campus wanting to go virtual, and then we'd have a little pessimism. And so it was an up and down summer thinking about what would the fall look like and how many members would we have return to campus? How many chapters would we have open? Would we have any chapters open? And I remember moving through the end of the summer and we were feeling really optimistic. And then the Cal State University system made the announcement that they were going to go virtual for all of the entire system, which included a number of DU chapters. And so we were worried that that would then become a snowball effect, but really it wasn't. And what we found was most campuses wanted to open, albeit they would have some restrictions on activities, on living facilities. But the great majority of our campuses decided they were going to move forward, they were going to open, and they were going to do it in a healthy and safe way. And so we spent a lot of time over the summer doing scenario planning, thinking about the fraternity's budget, what should we be budgeting for, how many students would come back, and we really took a conservative approach to what our membership might look like. But we couldn't be more pleased to share that our membership that came back to this fall is even with last fall. And so when we look at fall 2019 and fall 2020 returning members, our membership is exactly the same size. And if I think back to June, and if you told me that our membership would be even come October, I probably wouldn't have believed you. If you said we'd be down 10, 15%, I probably would have been pretty happy. And so we couldn't be more pleased that so many of our members came back to school, that our chapter houses are mostly filled, and that our members are having an experience. And so what I want to do is share some industry numbers to see how we're performing against a lot of the other fraternities in the industry. And so on this chart here, the North American Interfraternity Conference, which consists of 65 of the men's college fraternities, they did a survey of each of the organizations asking, how is your fall membership compared to last fall? And you can see there's a number of categories there. Are you down 25 to 40%? Are you down 11 to 24%? 1 to 10%? Are you even, or did you have a little increase over last year? And you can see that the majority of organizations were down 11 to 24% from last year, with the next largest grouping in that down 1 to 10%. And so I think we're pretty fortunate that we're breaking even on our membership from fall to fall when most fraternities in the country are seeing some pretty significant decreases. And so I think that's a testament to our undergraduates wanting to come back and have their DU experience, certainly a testament to our house corporations who worked diligently all summer to prepare the chapter facilities to be healthy and safe environments. I know there was a lot of communication with parents to ease their concerns that they could send their students back and that our facilities would be a safe place for them. And so we really couldn't be more pleased with where our membership ended up this fall. And so if we look at our chapter servicing model to serve all of our students, even though our semester ended early last year, we still conducted 113 chapter visits and 15 building betterment retreats. And so if you think about our chapter size, our chapter numbers of 69 chapters and colonies, that means that we almost did 2 chapter visits per chapter and colony. And so our team was out, they were visiting chapters in and out of chapter houses. And the building betterment retreats are weekend-long retreats that we do for the entire chapter. So we did have a lot of servicing last year, despite having to cut short the spring semester. So as we thought about how are we going to service this academic year in what will mostly be a virtual environment that we know that we can't travel, but like I said earlier, I think chapters need more support this year than they ever have. What they have been so accustomed to doing, they're just not able to do, and they're going to have to think differently about their operation. And so this year, each chapter has a dedicated liaison at the headquarters, with the expectation that the liaison is in regular communication with not only the chapter president, but the chapter officers, the chapter advisors, the fraternity sorority professional. And so every chapter will have monthly, if not weekly, touch points with their liaison. And what we have found now that we're about a month and a half into the academic year, that we're having significantly more communication and contact with our chapters, and not just, again, the chapter president, but with all the officers and their advisors and the FSA. So this virtual model is actually providing more contact and support to our chapters. And we knew that coming back to school this fall, that some campuses were going to have virtual recruitment. And so if you think about a chapter that has been so accustomed to doing summer recruitment and having in-person events, or coming back to school and participating in the formal recruitment that the campus was going to do, and now that would be virtual, we would have to train and educate and prepare our recruitment chairman to be successful in that environment. So we offered one-on-one recruitment coaching this summer that it was available to any chapter, and we would have ongoing sessions all throughout the summer to coach them through their individual chapter scenario. And so we would talk about, you know, what's happening on the campus and how is it changing and how can you engage the rest of the chapter. And so we're really pleased that 55 of our chapters participated in the one-on-one recruitment coaching. And as we're looking at the recruitment numbers coming in this fall, they're slightly down from last year, but they're pretty good, and they're better than probably what we expected. And so I think that one-on-one recruitment coaching all summer really provided a boost and a benefit to our undergraduate chapter leaders. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our educational programs, because we knew that without the in-person programs, these would have to be virtual. And as soon as we went to a virtual format, we started providing weekly virtual programs, and they began in April and have continued through the summer into the fall. We've already conducted more than, well, actually 23 virtual programs for chapters, and they're open to anybody who wants to participate. So we not only did the virtual workshops, but we also had short videos and best practices that we posted to YouTube that chapters could view and watch anytime. We did additional webinars for chapter advisors to prepare them for what the fall might bring. And so we not only did some virtual programs, we actually have already conducted our first virtual Building Betterment retreat. And so we were able to do that for a chapter in early September. So the Building Betterment retreats will continue throughout this fall and the spring, albeit we'll do it virtually. And I think all of us, whether it be the staff or all of you, have gotten used to this Zoom format. And so we'll continue these retreats throughout the year. We took a hard look at our chapter excellence plan and the Meta-Merit Standards program, knowing that many of the activities and standards would require a chapter to be fully functional, that everybody would need to be on campus, that you'd have to be able to have large groups participating in activities. And so we revised many of those standards and reduced a lot of the activities in the excellence plan to accommodate what we knew would be campus restrictions. So again, we went back to think about the tracking we had of where every campus would be and think about how could we create a CEP and Men in Merit program that every chapter would have the ability to participate in and be successful. And we'll make some accommodations along the way, but largely I think the majority of our chapters will be able to complete those programs throughout the year. Just this month, we started our officer roundtable discussions. And so we're bringing together chapter officers from different chapters to participate in discussion on best practices and how they can operate in this virtual environment. And one of the things we've heard from undergraduates really quite a bit over the last couple of months is that they want to hear from our successful DU alumni, that they might not be able to go to the Career Center on campus and they can't connect with their alumni at homecoming and other events. And so how can they still hear from our successful DU alumni? And so next month, we're going to launch our Executive Leadership Series, where we'll be doing interviews with some of our most successful DU alumni that we will allow them to just talk about their life journey and what they felt like best prepared them for their career and the leadership lessons they learned along the way. And so we'll be doing those at least monthly with some of our most successful DU alumni, and we can look for those to start next month. Now, our spring usually has many of our in-person programs. And so that first weekend in January, we typically bring all of our chapter presidents into Indiana for a weekend-long building retreat where we're teaching chapter presidents on how to do the job. They've just been elected, they're new and they're full of anticipation. And so we usually spend January training our chapter presidents. And then in February into March, we have our 5 regional leadership academies where we typically train the rest of the chapter officers with the chapter president to build a plan of how they're going to be successful over the course of their officer terms. And as I sit here today, it looks like we're going to have to be virtual for both the President's Academy and the RLA, unfortunately. But we've already started to build some plans on what that's going to look like in a virtual format. So we started to build the programming and to think about how can we move what we were doing in person to being virtual. And so we'll be fully prepared to launch both of those programs in a virtual format in January and February. And then finally, as we think about not only our DU programs being impacted, but I know that our men gain so much from the leadership programs that a campus offers, whether it be speakers or trainings, roundtables, that many of our campuses have had to put up a halt to those trainings. And so our men are not only losing out on the in-person DU experiences, but they're also missing out on some of those campus experiences. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about what are the other things that we could do to continue to build the leadership capacity of our young chapter leaders. And so AFLV, which is one of the organizations within the fraternity sorority industry, actually it's the organization that offers the largest in-person conference for fraternity and sorority members across all organizations. It's really one of the premier professional development opportunities in fraternity sorority life. And so this year, instead of being in person, they're moving their program to be a month-long virtual experience that will allow participants to access the content in a way that fits their schedules. And so some of the top speakers in the country on fraternity sorority life, on professional development, will be participating in these programs. They'll have breakouts for chapter officers. And we're going to offer 50 scholarships to undergraduates who want to participate in the AFLV experience, because we know that our men need more opportunities. And so we're going to provide those scholarships. And if we have more than 50 applicants, we'll add another 50 scholarships. And so we want to ensure that our men have the opportunity to participate in leadership programming if they desire to. And so we're committed to ensuring that as many men can participate as they want to. And I just want to thank many of our solid supporters of the DU Educational Foundation, our donors out there, that we've been able to offer these grants for the virtual education, for these personal and chapter development, as a result of the strong support that we receive from our donors. And so I know we'll thank you throughout the program, but right now I feel like it's just a perfect opportunity that we wouldn't be able to offer these scholarships to AFLV without our supporters to the DU Educational Foundation. So one of the areas that we received a number of questions was about the fraternity's finances, that the pandemic hit in March and we had to make a lot of changes to the operation, and how would we operate through this fiscal year. And so as I mentioned earlier, we had to furlough 1/3 of the fraternity staff, and we haven't brought those staff back yet, but we think in January, February, we'll start bringing some of the staff back to really ramp up the operation in the hopes that next academic year will be fully operational, that we'll be doing things in person, that we'll have our LI in July. And so in January, I anticipate that we'll bring back some of our furloughed staff. As many of you know, the government offered some financial assistance programs for businesses and nonprofits. The Delta Upsilon Educational Foundation received funds from the Payroll Protection Program, and the fraternity qualified for the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. And so those two financial opportunities really were a big boost to help us continue operating through the summer months. And we knew that this pandemic would impact chapters, undergraduates, house corporations. And it was more than just men not being in the chapter facility or maybe not coming back to school, that so many of our students, and it's actually about 55% of our undergraduate men have jobs, whether that they be over the summer or during the academic year. And we knew that because of the pandemic, many of them wouldn't have the opportunity to work. And so they would come back to school with fewer finances. And the last thing we would want would be for men to not be able to continue their DU experience in the fall because they didn't have a job over the summer, or that they were going to have some financial challenges. So I'm going to share a couple of the steps that the fraternity took to help alleviate some of the burden on chapters. We had a number of fee increases planned for this academic year, and the board decided to suspend all those fee increases. The board canceled all the late fees and interest charges that we were charging chapters. And we passed a deficit budget, a fairly significant deficit budget, so that we could maintain services despite some anticipated revenue losses. That, as I mentioned earlier, we really did believe that our chapters would need more support than ever, and we wanted to be able to provide that support. And so we did pass a deficit budget this year that allowed us to maintain a level of staffing and support and services that we think could help our chapters make it through this academic year. For the first time, we used reserves from our loss prevention fund to decrease the insurance fee. We had an increase on our liability insurance, and instead of passing that increase on to the students, we actually used reserves to be able to pass on a decrease to our students. And so our loss prevention fees on average went down 9% over last year's fees. And that was really a result of us deciding to use reserves to help our students and our chapters out. And we reduced some of the coverages as well. We reduced some staffing. We really wanted to be able to lower that insurance expense, which really is one of the higher expenses that our students pay for. And so we'll talk about a little bit more about loss prevention a little later. And because our membership returned at a much higher level than we had budgeted, we have evaluated how we're going to be able to provide some additional financial relief to chapters. And so by November 15th, we'll have a memo out to all chapters that will provide financial relief for every chapter, with those chapters who were impacted the most receiving a little bit more. And so those chapters that are virtual, that they're not in the chapter house, they're not participating in activities, we're going to provide them some more relief, but we will have a package that will be able to provide relief to every chapter. And so we have a bigger membership coming back than we had budgeted. We had actually budgeted for a 40% decrease in our membership. We budgeted conservatively. There were so many unknowns, but our membership has come back strong. And because it has come back so strong, we're going to pass back some of those fees to our students who we know are still being challenged by the pandemic. And before we move off the finances, I think just one last thing I want to mention. It's not only the international fraternity and our undergraduates who are feeling the impact. This impact is being felt across the entire fraternity. And that applies to our house corporations. That I had conversations with a lot of house corporation officers from March through September, and they had to make a lot of tough decisions to think about, do we refund fees? What do we do about leases in the fall? Can we fill the chapter house? How are we going to pay the mortgage? And I couldn't be more proud of our alumni officers, our house corporation boards that stepped up to the challenge. This isn't what they signed up for, managing a chapter facility through a pandemic, but they've done a great job. And I know that this has been hard on a lot of our house corporations. And so we really do want to say thank you. We know it hasn't been tough, and we'll continue to support you however we can. But these moments often bring out the best in all of us. And one quick story to tell, our Oklahoma alumni, the house corporation, knew that they wouldn't have as many students coming back. And so they did a short-term fundraising effort. And when I say short-term, this was a month-and-a-half fundraising effort. And the alumni came together and they raised $75,000 to be able to support the chapter facility and the undergraduates. And so we will get through this because the DU spirit is strong, and people want to support their chapter. And so again, thank you to all of you who are stepping up to the plate to support your chapters. So we'll talk a little bit about loss prevention. And some of the questions I often get are, what keeps you up at night? Or where do your biggest challenges lie? Or what is the biggest threat to fraternity? And to be honest, it's the rising cost of insurance. That our liability insurance is our fastest growing expense, and it's now greater than 1/3 of our entire budget. And so this is the liability insurance that we provide to chapters and undergraduates and officers and parents and alumni, and some of the other insurance that we have. And so this cost is rising. And so the costs are not only rising, but the availability of the insurance, it's a tough market out there for fraternities to gain insurance. Unfortunately, we're able to maintain sufficient coverage, but we are concerned about the rising cost. And I know that I hear this often from undergraduates and alumni, and it is at the top of the board's priorities to think about and to consider, how do we address the rising cost of insurance? And so again, this year we use reserves to respond to what I would call a short-term crisis, while the board thinks about what is a long-term plan to stabilize those rising costs. That 9% fee reduction that we provided this year is greater than any other national fraternity provided to their chapters and undergraduates, but it's not a long-term solution. And so the board has established a committee that is exploring alternative insurance options. And that committee will have a report back to the board by February 1st. And hopefully that we'll be able to find a more stable long-term solution to our insurance costs. But with all that said, we are in an insurance captive with 25 organizations, and DU has one of the 5 lowest rates of all the fraternities in that insurance captive. And so that really is a testament to our undergraduates who are doing the right thing. They're following our policies, they're looking out for their brothers, and they're making the right decisions. And so the rising cost that we're seeing for insurance is happening because of the industry, and it's happening because of other losses, not necessarily DU losses. But we are part of an industry, and the insurance company rates us based on that industry. And so one of the other areas that I'm going to touch on within loss prevention, that we're in a pretty challenging legal environment right now, that there are some law firms that are beginning to specialize in fraternity lawsuits. And so they are focused on incidents that when they happen, they're reaching out to those who may have been injured. And so this is one of the areas that we are really focused on. And really the entire industry is. And so you may have seen some information that in the last 2 years alone, fraternities and sororities have used legal challenge to beat back attempts by Yale and Harvard to eliminate the single-sex experience. So this challenging legal environment isn't just for individual organizations, but it's for the industry as a whole. that we're having to reverse recruitment restrictions. We're working on zoning restrictions in specific communities. We're protecting the single-sex experience. We're protecting the freedom of association. And DU is a part of and a supporter of a fraternity sorority action fund that funds the defense efforts to protect the entire community. And so I just want everybody to be rest assured that the community is focused on these efforts, that there is a fund that is supporting it, and we've largely been successful. And so for our organization, we're having to think about how do we protect our assets long term, and what are the additional steps that we need to take. And fortunately, we have a great set of legal advisors and insurance advisors who are advising us. And while this is one of our real challenges, I think we're all feeling comfortable that we'll be able to address these long term. And so finally, we had a couple of questions about our substance-free housing policy. And that was a policy that the board adopted in 2018 to join a number of other national fraternities. After a lot of consideration and research and thought and focus groups, it was the direction that we moved forward with full implementation happening in 2020. And so the great majority of our chapters are substance-free this fall. And when we think about compliance, and this policy is regulated and monitored like all of our other policies, that we empower our chapter officers and our advisors to hold our members accountable, that if they see a violation, they know of a violation, that they address it. And now that we're a month and a half or so into the semester, we've had one chapter that has had a policy violation, but overall, the compliance with the policy has been really strong. And so we're pretty pleased with the implementation of the policy and how we're moving forward. And so one last chart that I'll share on loss prevention. I think it's one of the data points that I'm frankly most proud of. And this chart here shows our fraternity losses or claims, dollars paid out over 2 decades. And so the chart there on the left is from 2000 to 2009. We paid out a little more than $3 million in insurance claims. And then if you look at the next decade, this last one from 2010 to 2019, it's about half of that. And as we think about, well, what is the change? Over the last 10 years, as Tom mentioned earlier, we've implemented a number of new educational programs and initiatives and chapter servicing attempts and the Building Better Men retreats that we think really are making a difference in the undergraduate experience. And we're certainly seeing it when it comes to loss prevention and the number of incidents and the dollars paid out. And so while the industry is having a lot of challenges, I think all of us can be really proud that we're moving in the right direction, and we're going to have a good solution moving forward. And so, Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about some alumni engagement.
Thank you. Yep. I just wanted to kind of capstone a couple things that Justin mentioned through that. It was a lot of information, and we're happy to share it with you at any point at another time. So feel free, if we didn't get deep enough into it and you've got other questions, feel free to reach out to either one of us. We're going to talk a little bit about how at the end of the program. But I just wanted to just say a couple of things. It was unfathomable to me the amount of work that the fraternity's headquarters staff and that the board engaged in order to get us from March to where we are now in October. It is the scenario planning and the budgeting and the forecasting and the making different plans, because as you all know, over the summer, things changed on a dime with what was going on in our plans for all the organizations that you're involved in, but also for the fraternity. So we have a significant amount of thanks out to the fraternity staff, but also to the board for their significant amount of work that was going on behind the scenes. And the other thing that was an interesting takeaway for me was that when we talked about our recruitment numbers, when Justin mentioned that we are very fortunate at DU to be coming back somewhat even on our numbers, I had not thought about the fact that the undergraduates that were coming back would need and want a way to connect. We're hearing time and time again on campuses throughout North America that students that were coming to campus for the first time, incoming freshmen, or students that were even returning, were looking for ways to engage. And so my thinking was changing because they were looking for a way to connect, and we were able to provide them with that way to connect because our chapters had said, you know what, we could use some virtual recruitment training. And so we're grateful to our undergraduates for thinking outside the box and challenging themselves and doing things a little bit differently, because it is netting them some results. But more importantly, it's helping us shape lives for students that were coming into campuses. And that can only be a positive thing. It's definitely a different world, and we're needing to support our undergraduates differently than we have in the past. And we look forward to that. And we've been doing some great work. And that's where you all come into this. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. We couldn't be more grateful for all of the work that our DU volunteers are doing, many of whom are obviously on the call tonight. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We can't see your faces, can't see your names, but on behalf of the fraternity, we want to thank you. And you're doing things in different ways than you've done before. We're grateful for all the different kinds of efforts. When you took on a volunteer role, nobody could have known we'd be going into COVID. Nobody would have known that we'd be changing how we do things at the chapter house level. If you've got a physical structure or property that we're responsible for, none of us knew that we'd be signing up for all of these challenges. But here we are, and we're grateful. So thank you for getting in and getting your hands dirty and digging in and helping. We found that our alumni brothers do have more time on their hands right now. Perhaps if you're not educating a 2 and a 3 and a 4-year-old at home in distance learning, we've got a lot of folks out there that are saying, I've got a couple extra minutes when I'm at home. And so we'd like to engage you, and you've asked how you can help, and we want to help you get involved. We would welcome more alumni serving as chapter advisors. Obviously, the best way for students to grow is to have advisors and mentors supporting their efforts. So we can always use more alumni supporting the undergraduates at the undergraduate level. So if there's a way that we would be able to connect you with a local chapter or an undergraduate, please let us know, especially if it's a group that's needing support and you have some extra time. Right now, we can do these things virtually, and it's a fantastic opportunity. And maybe you could lead a virtual workshop for a chapter. Not hard to do. You could do it from home. We'd be happy to help coordinate that. We've been doing it better and stronger each month, and we'd love to get you connected with an undergraduate chapter. And our undergraduates have requested more workshops. They've asked for ways to connect with their alumni. So if that's something of interest for you, or you've got something that you think would be of value to the undergrads, let's get you connected. It's an excellent way to share best practices and leadership lessons that you've learned along in your journey. They're teaming for that. And then finally, we'd like to provide a quick update on the Educational Foundation. Everybody is still needing funds now more than ever. And yet fundraising has changed dramatically in the last 6 to 7 months. We as an organization could not be more pleased to share that in the 2019 and 20 fiscal year, our donors really stepped up. And going forward, we're going to need a new annual fund record. So we couldn't be more appreciative of your support in the past. We, like lots of other organizations, need it going forward, and our undergraduates need it. So it's needed more than ever, and we'd like to make sure that we are appealing to you and letting you know that there are ways to give, there are ways to donate, and we can be using it, and the undergraduates would appreciate it. Justin.
So thank you for joining us tonight. We couldn't be more appreciative of you taking your time from your evening to hear about all the great things that are happening in DU. And there really are a lot of great things. But we do want to share that if you have questions or you want to learn more about any of our initiatives, there's Tom's email, there's my email. We're certainly willing to have a phone conversation to discuss any of the initiatives that we talked about tonight. I found that my days are now filled with Zoom calls and phone calls, because like Tom said, people have more time on their hands. And so we certainly appreciate hearing from our alumni and sharing their thoughts and comments on how things are going and how they can support us. So again, thank you for joining us tonight. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, the greatest thing that I have enjoyed in a way that I hadn't been able to enjoy it before, and certainly as president of the fraternity, the time that I've been president of the fraternity, I've gotten more wonderful phone calls and emails inquiring about things, and that is a wonderful way for me to connect and to appreciate and to be able to say thank you to all of you who are involved. So Again, if we can, feel free to email us, feel free to reach out. We still have an incredible resource in so many people on the fraternity's headquarters staff. We can direct you. You can ask questions, and we'd love to be able to get you the answers. This is our organization. This is our fraternity. We're going to be around for another 200 and some odd years, and we want all of us to be able to do that and be a part of that as best we can. To that end, and before we close, I'd like to remind you all about our 5th annual Founders Day of Giving, which is coming up on November 4th, day after Election Day. Tonight, we'd like to ask for your support for our undergraduate brothers and ask you to consider making a gift on our Founders Day of Giving, November 4th. We are looking forward to celebrating our 186th anniversary of the fraternity, and we couldn't be more proud of how our members have stepped up in the past and how they've been handling the adversity of the pandemic. Let's honor that, and let's continue to support our undergraduates. The continued gifts that you give of your time and treasured by our supporters is what we need to keep DU a leader in the interfraternal world and to keep our students thriving on their campuses. So November 4th could not be a bigger deal for us. You'll see there's a link that we have. If you have an opportunity to give, just visit deltau.org, go to the foundation page and to the Founders Day of Giving. Make any kind of a gift, small or large. We want to appeal to you, and we want to be grateful for you, and we just want to thank you. And again, on behalf of the fraternity, we appreciate your time and for joining us this evening.
Thanks again, brothers, and have a great night.
That's it, Justin. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.